The wind in the dead zone always smelled different from the rest of the forest. It smelled like old metal and rain that had fallen 100 times before. Ren liked that smell. She liked it because her mother always said it was dangerous, and forbidden things were more interesting than safe ones. Ren was a small dragon, still young enough that her scales had not hardened all the way, still soft and shiny like wet stones. Her hatched brother Rook was bigger than her by only a few months, but he acted like those months made him wise. He walked ahead of her now, pushing through the tangled vines with his front claws, muttering that they should turn back before their mother noticed they were gone. She won't notice, Ren said. She's busy with the council meeting. She always notices, Rook said. But he kept walking anyway. The place they were walking toward was called the Old Outpost, though nobody in the clan called it that without lowering their voice first. It was a ruin, a wide stretch of broken metal walls and crumbled stone floors, half swallowed by roots and moss. Long ago, before either of them hatched, before their mother hatched, it had been a real place, full of walls that still stood and machines that still worked. Now it was just bones. Dragon bones did not rot the way this place had rotted. Metal did. Ren stepped over a fallen beam and looked up at what was left of a tower. Rain had worn the metal into soft curves, and green plants grew out of the cracks like the ruin was trying to become a forest again. She had heard the elders talk about the outpost only in pieces, never the whole story. Something about a war. Something about humans, a word she barely understood because there were no humans left in the clan's memory, only stories about them. And stories always got smaller and stranger the older they became. Rook stopped at the edge of what used to be a doorway, twice his height, now leaning to one side like a tired old dragon. "This is far enough," he said. "You always say that. Because you always want to go one step more than far enough." Ren ignored him and slipped through the leaning doorway into the room beyond. The floor was cracked, and small plants poked up through every crack, but the walls still had traces of old paint, faded to almost nothing. She sniffed the air. Metal, rain, and something else, something warmer, almost sweet, like the smell right before a storm breaks. She followed the smell to a corner where the floor had caved in slightly, forming a shallow dip filled with old dirt and broken stone. Something in the dirt caught the little light coming through the broken roof. It was small, round, and metal, half buried, with a thin chain still attached to it. "Rook," she called. "Come look." He came in slower than she wanted, glancing at the doorway behind them like he expected someone to be standing there. When he saw what she was pointing at, his expression changed from annoyed to curious. "That's not dragon-made," he said. "I know." Ren reached down and pulled it free of the dirt. It was heavier than it looked, cold at first the way metal always was, but the moment her claws closed fully around it, the cold faded fast, like the pendant was warming itself against her skin. She turned it over. There were markings scratched into the surface, small and neat, not the kind of markings dragons used. Underneath the dirt, she could just make out a small round shape in the center, like a tiny window, and behind that window was the faintest hint of light, dim and steady, like an ember that refused to go out. "It's warm," she said, surprised. "Metal doesn't get warm on its own." Rook leaned closer, sniffing at it carefully the way their mother sniffed anything unfamiliar before deciding if it was safe. "Not out here. Not buried in the dirt for who knows how long. Maybe it's not that old. Everything in this place is that old." Ren held it up to the light coming through the broken roof, turning it slowly, watching the faint glow inside shift like it was reacting to being moved. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something strange pass through her, quick and light, like a breath of wind brushing past her scales, except it wasn't wind. It felt closer than that. It felt like it came from somewhere behind her chest instead of outside her body at all. She didn't tell Rook about that part. "We should show Mother," Rook said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty now. He kept staring at the pendant like it might do something else. "She'll take it away." "She might not." "She will. She takes away everything interesting we find out here." Ren closed her claws around the pendant again, and this time the warmth felt almost comforting, like holding a small ember close on a cold night. "We'll show her later. Tonight. After she's done with the council." Rook didn't argue, which surprised her a little, because usually he argued about everything. Instead, he glanced once more at the doorway, at the fading light outside, and said they should head back before the sky turned dark. They left the ruin the way they came, slipping back through the leaning doorway, back through the tangled vines, back toward the nesting grounds where the air smelled like home instead of rain and old metal. Ren kept the pendant curled tight against her chest the whole way, hidden from view, feeling its warmth pulse very faintly, almost like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. Neither of them noticed that with every step they took away from the ruin, the small light inside the pendant grew, just slightly, just enough to notice if either of them had been watching closely. Neither of them were. They had no way of knowing yet what they were carrying home. The sound started so quietly that Rook almost didn't wake up for it. It was thin, broken, and small, the kind of sound that could have been mistaken for wind slipping through a crack in the nest wall. He only sat up because it kept going, on, never stopping the way wind sometimes did. He turned his head and saw Ren curled in the corner of their shared nest, her small body shaking, the pendant still clutched tight against her chest. Tears ran down her face in the dim light, and her breath came out in short, broken gasps between the sounds she was making. Ren. He crawled closer, careful, the way their mother had taught them to move around something hurt. Ren, what's wrong? Did something bite you? She shook her head, unable to answer right away. He looked her over anyway, checking her legs, her wings, her tail, looking for a wound, a swelling, anything that would explain why she was crying like this. There was nothing. No blood, no bruise, nothing except the pendant glowing faintly in her claws, brighter now than it had been in the ruin. I don't know why, Ren finally managed to say, her voice cracking. I don't know why I'm sad. I'm not sad. I don't feel sad. But I can't stop. That frightened Rook more than a wound would have. A wound he understood. This, he didn't. Put it down, he said. Put the pendant down. She tried. Her claws opened, and the pendant slid an inch across the nest floor. But the moment it left her grip, her breath caught even harder, like something inside her had been pulled too tight, and then let go all at once. She grabbed it back without meaning to, curling around it again, and the crying eased just slightly, enough that Rook understood, somehow, that putting it down wasn't going to fix this. He didn't know what would. I'm getting mother, he said, and this time Ren didn't argue. He found her fast, faster than he expected, because Vera was already awake, standing near the entrance of the nesting grounds, looking out at the dark tree line the way she sometimes did when something felt wrong before she could explain why. She turned the moment she heard him coming. Ren won't stop crying, Rook said, the words spilling out too fast. She's not hurt. There's no wound. She found something in the old outpost, a pendant, and now she can't stop, and she doesn't know why, and I don't know what to do. Vera went very still. It was a stillness Rook had only seen once before, during a storm 2 seasons ago when lightning had struck close enough to the nesting grounds to shake the ground under their feet. It was the stillness of someone deciding, very quickly, that something serious was happening. Show me, she said. She followed him back to the nest, moving low and quiet, and when she saw Ren curled around the small glowing pendant, still crying, still shaking, her expression changed in a way Rook didn't have words for. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. Something closer to recognition. Vera knelt beside her daughter and did not reach for the pendant right away. Instead, she reached for Ren herself, wrapping around her gently, letting her cry into her side the way hatchlings did when the world became too big for them to understand on their own. Ren cried harder for a moment, then slower, then finally into something quieter, exhausted rather than frantic. Only then did Vera look down at the pendant still clutched in her daughter's claws. She went quiet again, staring at the faint markings on its surface, the small round window with its dim, steady light. Rook watched his mother's face carefully, waiting for her to say it was nothing, that they had found some old broken trinket and it meant nothing at all. She didn't say that. Where did you find this? She asked instead, and her voice was different now, careful in a way it usually wasn't. The old outpost, Rook admitted. The ruin near the tower. We weren't supposed to go there, I know, but that's not what I'm asking about right now. Vera reached out one claw, not to take the pendant, but to touch it gently, the way someone might touch something they hadn't expected to see again. I'm asking because I know this place, and I know what this is. What is it? Ren asked, her voice small and hoarse from crying. Vera didn't answer immediately. She looked at the pendant a long moment, then at her daughter, then out toward the dark trees beyond the nest, as if the answer lived somewhere out there and she needed a second to find it. There is a name, she finally said, that we do not use lightly in this clan. Not because it is a bad name, because it is a heavy one. She paused again. The warden. Neither hatchling had heard it before. Rook opened his mouth to ask who that was, but Vera was already moving, already gathering both of them close, already deciding something in her mind that she hadn't shared with them yet. This cannot wait until morning, she said. Elder Sorn needs to see this tonight. Rin looked down at the pendant one more time before her mother lifted her gently to carry her out into the dark. The crying had stopped almost completely now, but the warmth in the metal against her claws hadn't faded at all. If anything, it felt steadier now, like it had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally notice it, and now that someone had, it wasn't going to let go easily. They left the nest together, mother and both hatchlings, walking through the quiet dark toward the elder's den, none of them speaking, all of them thinking about a name none of the young ones understood yet, but one that was about to change everything they thought they knew about the ruin, the war, and the strangers who had once lived beside them. Elder Sorn's den sat apart from the rest of the nesting grounds, built into the side of a hill where old stone met older roots. Most young dragons only saw the inside of it once or twice in their whole lives, usually for something serious. Rook had never been inside it before. He noticed that even in the dark, even half asleep with worry, some small part of him was still nervous about that. Sorn was already awake when they arrived, which did not surprise Vera at all. The old dragon rarely seemed to sleep the way younger dragons did, as if age had traded away rest for something else, something quieter and more watchful. Sorn's eyes, pale and clouded at the edges, moved first to Vera, then to the two hatchlings behind her, then finally down to the pendant still held loosely in Ren's claws. Something shifted in the old dragon's face. It was not surprise. It was closer to recognition, the same look Vera had worn back in the nest, except deeper, older, like a memory finally arriving after being expected for a very long time. Bring it here, Sorn said, voice low and rough with age. Let me see it properly. Ren hesitated, glancing up at her mother first. Vera nodded, and Ren stepped forward slowly, holding the pendant out. Sorn did not grab for it. The old dragon leaned close instead, studying the markings on its surface, the small round window, the faint steady glow inside, without ever actually touching it. I know this, Sorn said quietly. I have not seen it in a very long time, but I know it. What is it? Rook asked, unable to stay quiet any longer. Sorn settled back, folding down onto the stone floor with the slow care of someone whose joints had carried too many seasons. Sit, the old dragon said. Both of you. This is not a short story, and it deserves to be heard properly, not rushed through standing up. They sat. Vera stayed close behind them, watching Sorn with an expression that mixed patience and old grief in equal measure. There is something you should understand first, Sorn began, about hatchlings like Ren. It is rare, rarer than most dragons ever witness in their whole lives, but it happens. Some are born thread-sensitive. It means they can feel echoes, faint traces of strong feeling left behind in objects that carried real meaning to whoever held them last. Most dragons touch an old, worn thing and feel nothing but metal or wood or cloth. A thread-sensitive dragon feels what was felt while it was held. Ren looked down at the pendant in her claws, her breath catching slightly. That's why I was crying. It wasn't my sadness. No, Sorn agreed gently. It was not yours. It was left there, inside that metal, a long time ago, by someone who was feeling something enormous in the last moments they held it. Rook frowned. Who? Sorn's gaze drifted somewhere past them, somewhere in the past instead of the den. This outpost you found it in was not always a ruin. There was a time when it stood whole, when dragons and humans lived and worked inside it together. That was generations before any of you hatched, before I hatched, though I heard the stories directly from those who lived through it, which is more than most of our clan can say now. Humans, Ren repeated softly, testing the word. Yes, they came from somewhere far beyond our skies, fighting an enemy that threatened both our kind and theirs. For a time, we were allies, sharing this outpost, sharing defenses, sharing far more than either side expected to when it began. It did not last. Alliances built during war rarely do, once the war changes shape. But before it ended, something happened here that our clan has never fully let go of, and never fully spoken about outside these walls either. Soren paused, looking directly at the pendant now instead of the hatchlings holding it. There was a human among them called the Warden. Not his true name, not one many of us can say correctly anymore after all this time, but the name our clan gave him, and the only name that has survived in our stories since. He held a position of little importance by human ranks, an engineer, someone who fixed machines rather than commanded soldiers. And yet, when the worst attack came, when everyone with true authority to decide such things had already given the order to evacuate, it was the Warden who chose to stay behind. Stay behind for what? Rook asked, leaning forward without meaning to. Soren's old eyes settled on Ren, on the pendant she held, before answering. For the eggs, the elder said quietly. The unhatched nursery, sealed deep below the outpost, could not be moved in time. Every soldier capable of defending it had already fallen back with the wounded. There was no one left to hold that door except a human with no weapon training and no reason at all to stay, except that he decided the eggs mattered enough to try anyway. The den went very quiet. Even the faint glow inside the pendant seemed steadier now, as if it too were listening. What happened to him? Ren asked, though something in her voice suggested she already feared the answer. Soren did not answer right away. Instead, the old dragon looked toward the entrance of the den, toward the dark sky beyond it, the same way Vera had looked toward the tree line earlier that night, as if searching for words that had been carried a long way and needed care to set back down properly. That, Soren finally said, is the part of the story that belongs to tomorrow, when the whole clan can hear it together, not just the three of you in the middle of the night. For now, you should know this much. Whatever Ren is feeling through that pendant, it did not come from nothing, and it did not come from no one. It came from someone who mattered enormously to this clan, whether we speak of him often or not. Ren looked down at the pendant again, at the small steady light inside it, and for the first time since finding it, the sadness she felt did not frighten her. It felt, instead, like something she had been trusted with, whether she had asked for it or not. The last transport ship left before the sun rose, and nobody on it looked back. There wasn't time to look back. The enemy had broken through the outer defense line 2 days earlier than anyone expected, and every hour after that had been spent deciding what could be saved and what had to be left behind. Daniel Reyes was not supposed to still be at the outpost when that ship left. His name had been on the evacuation list, near the bottom, since engineers were rarely the first priority when ships only had room for the wounded and the very young. He had a seat reserved. He didn't take it. He stood instead in the lower levels of the outpost, in a narrow concrete corridor that led to the nursery vault, watching the last group of soldiers retreat past him toward the surface. Their commanding officer, a tired woman with a bandage wrapped hastily around one arm, stopped just long enough to grab his shoulder. That door doesn't matter if there's no one left alive to open it later, she said. Get to the ship, Reyes. That's an order, not a request. There's still time to move some of them, Daniel said, nodding past her toward the vault. If someone holds the corridor for even 20 minutes, the transfer team can get half the clutch out through the lower tunnel. There is no transfer team. They pulled out an hour ago. Then I'll hold it myself. She looked at him like he'd said something absurd, because by every reasonable measure, he had. He wasn't a soldier. He'd spent most of his time at the outpost repairing power couplings and patching up old ventilation systems, not fighting. But the look on his face wasn't the look of someone about to change his mind, and she didn't have the time left to argue him out of it. You'll die down here, she said. Maybe, but if I don't try, they definitely will. He glanced toward the vault door, thick and reinforced, built to protect what was inside it from far more ordinary threats than what was coming now. Go. Get everyone else out. I'll do what I can. She left. He never saw her again, and he never found out whether she made it to the ship in time either. Daniel turned back toward the vault alone, running through what he actually had available to work with. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew every wire and panel in that corridor better than almost anyone left in the outpost, because he was the one who had installed half of them. The outer defense turret above the vault door had been offline for repairs for nearly 2 weeks, its control relay stripped out for cleaning and never fully reinstalled. He had the replacement part sitting and used in a storage locker one level up. He ran for it. By the time the first enemy units reached the lower corridor, the turret was live again, crude and unstable, wired together faster and messier than it should have been, but firing. Daniel crouched behind an overturned supply crate, watching the corridor through a cracked monitor screen, manually adjusting the turret's aim through a control panel never meant to be operated that way, by someone never trained to operate it at all. It held. Not perfectly, not easily, but it held. Behind the sealed vault door, deep beneath his feet, sat rows of eggs too fragile to move without proper equipment and proper time, neither of which existed anymore. He didn't know most of them personally. He couldn't have. Dragons didn't let humans near the nursery casually, not even allies, not even during the best years of the Alliance. But he had stood guard outside that vault often enough, on quiet nights when nothing threatened it at all, that it had started to feel like something worth protecting on principle alone, whether he understood everything inside it or not. The fighting lasted longer than 20 minutes. It lasted most of the day. He ran out of turret ammunition twice and found makeshift ways to reload it both times, stripping parts from nearby systems that no longer mattered anyway. He was hit once, a graze along his side that he wrapped with whatever cloth he could find without stopping to properly treat it. He kept the corridor sealed the entire time, kept the enemy from ever reaching the vault door itself, kept holding a line that no military planner would have ever expected one unarmed engineer to hold. By the time the counterattack finally arrived, hours later than anyone had promised, driving the enemy units back from the outpost entirely, the corridor was a wreck of scorched metal and spent turret casings. The vault door stood exactly where it had that morning, untouched, unbreached, sealed. Daniel was not standing when they found him. He was sitting against the wall near the turret controls, exhausted past the point of moving, his side bleeding slowly through a makeshift bandage that had done its job just well enough. When the first dragons reached him, moving cautiously through the wreckage, he only asked one thing before anything else. The eggs. Are they all right? They were. Every single one. He didn't survive the transport back to proper medical care. The wound had been worse than it looked, worse than he had let on to anyone while the fighting was still happening, and by the time anyone realized how bad it truly was, there was nothing left to do but stay beside him until the end came. The pendant was found later near the turret controls, where he had been sitting, worn smooth from being held tightly for most of that day. No one ever fully agreed on why he'd kept holding it through hours of fighting instead of leaving it somewhere safer. Some said it reminded him why he was staying. Others said it simply gave his hands something to do besides shake. What the clan agreed on, without needing to discuss it twice, was that every hatchling born from that clutch afterward owed their first breath to a human who had no obligation to give it to them, and chose to anyway. Rook hadn't slept at all after leaving Elder Sorn's den, and by the time the sun came up over the nesting grounds, he had already made up his mind about something, even before he fully understood why it mattered so much to him. He found Sorn again shortly after morning, before the rest of the clan had gathered for the day, before Ren had even woken from the exhausted sleep she'd finally fallen into. He came alone this time, carrying nothing, asking for nothing except a question he needed answered. "You said the pendant carries an echo," Rook said, standing at the entrance of the den. "You said Ren feels something from it, because she's thread-sensitive. But is that all it holds? Just a feeling? Or is there something more inside it, something that could actually be understood, not just felt?" Sorn studied him for a long moment before answering. "Why do you ask?" "Because feeling sad about someone we never knew isn't enough," Rook said, more firmly than he expected himself to sound. "If he did what you said he did, he deserves more than a feeling passed down by accident. He deserves to actually be heard, if there's any way to make that happen." Something in the old dragon's expression shifted, quiet approval mixed with something closer to surprise. "You may be right about that. There were old human devices that stored more than feeling, recordings, messages, meant to be played back properly by the right equipment. If the pendant was ever meant to carry more than an echo, it's possible something like that still exists inside it, dormant, waiting for the right method to draw it out. Can we find that method?" Sorn rose slowly, joints creaking with the effort. "There are a few old human systems still stored in the Outpost archive, untouched for longer than either of us has been alive. It's possible. It will take care, and it will take time we did not expect to spend today. But if you are asking whether it's worth trying, yes. I believe it is. It took most of the morning. Soren led a small group, Rook, Vera, and 2 clan engineers skilled with old human technology from decades of careful preservation work, deep into a sealed section of the outpost archive that most young dragons had never even heard existed. Rin joined partway through, awake now and insistent on being there when whatever this was happened, the pendant still held tightly in her claws the entire time. The device they eventually found and carefully connected the pendant to was small, old, and stubborn, refusing to respond at first no matter how carefully the engineers adjusted its worn components. Rook watched every attempt with growing impatience, until finally, on what felt like the 10th try, a faint light flickered across an old display screen, and a thin, static-filled sound began to play. The voice that came through was rough, tired, and unmistakably human, cutting through decades of silence like it had been recorded only hours ago instead of a lifetime. "If anyone's listening to this," the voice said, "then I guess that means the vault held. That's good. That's really good." The room went completely silent. Even Soren, who had lived through nearly everything the clan remembered, went still in a way Rook had never seen before. "I don't know who you are," the voice continued, quieter now, strained with obvious exhaustion. "Maybe you're one of the ones from down there. Maybe you're someone who found this a long time after, and none of us made it. Either way, I want whoever's listening to know something, because I don't think anyone's going to have the chance to say it properly otherwise." A pause. Something that might have been a tired laugh, or might have been a wince of pain, was hard to tell through the old recording static. "People are going to ask why I stayed. Officers already have, more than once today. And honestly, it wasn't complicated. Everyone up top already had someone fighting for them. Soldiers, medics, evacuation crews, all of it. Down here, there was nobody. Just a door, and everything behind it that couldn't run, couldn't fight, couldn't even understand what was happening to it. Somebody had to stay for that too." Ren's claws tightened slightly around the device, though she didn't move otherwise, didn't make a sound, just listened. "I'm not a soldier. Never trained to be one. If this doesn't work, if the door doesn't hold, I want it understood that it wasn't because nobody tried. It just means the people who are supposed to inherit this weren't given enough time by the universe, and that's not fair, but it's not nothing either. Every minute counts. I intend to make every minute I have left count." Another pause, longer this time. "Whoever hatches because of today, I hope you get a long life. I hope it's a good one. And if somehow, somewhere down the line, this recording actually reaches you, I just want you to know there were people who chose you. Not by accident. Not because we were ordered to. We chose you, on purpose, because you mattered, even before you existed yet to know it." The recording ended there, cutting off mid-breath, static filling the silence afterward until one of the engineers finally reached forward and gently powered the device down. Nobody spoke for a long time. Vera was the first to move, gathering both of her hatchlings close without a word, and Rook led her, something in his chest tight and unfamiliar, not quite grief, not quite pride, something sitting uncomfortably between the two. Soren finally broke the silence, voice quieter than usual, addressing the whole small group rather than any one of them specifically. "This cannot stay a private matter any longer. Not after this. The whole clan deserves to hear what we just heard, and the warden deserves to finally be remembered properly, not just as a name we lower our voices for." Rin looked down at the small device in her claws, silent now. Its light dimmed once more, and for the first time since finding it in the ruin, she didn't feel like she was carrying someone else's sadness alone anymore. She felt like she was carrying something the whole clan needed to carry together. Word travels fast through a clan that has spent generations waiting, without quite knowing it, for a single missing piece of its own history. By the time the sun began to set that same day, nearly every dragon in the nesting grounds had gathered near the old outpost ruins, drawn there by a story that had spread mouth to mouth faster than anyone could have planned. Ren had never seen so many dragons in one place before. Elders who rarely left their dens stood beside young hatchlings barely out of their first season. Clan members who worked the far borders had come back early, word reaching them somehow before they even returned home properly. All of them stood facing the leaning doorway of the old vault entrance. The same doorway Ren and Rook had slipped through only a day earlier without any idea what waited inside. Elder Sorn stood at the front, near the doorway itself, with the pendant resting carefully in an open claw. Beside the old dragon stood Vera, and beside her, Ren and Rook, chosen without much discussion to stand closest to the place where it all began, since it had, after all, begun with them. Sorn waited until the crowd settled into quiet before speaking, voice carrying easily across the ruin despite its age and roughness. Many of you have heard pieces of this story before, in fragments, passed down carelessly enough over the years that most assumed it was closer to legend than history. I understand why. Time does that to stories it isn't given proper care. Today we correct that. The old dragon told it again, slower this time, more complete, for the benefit of those hearing it properly for the first time. The evacuation. The sealed vault. The human engineer with no obligation to stay who stayed anyway, defending a nursery vault alone against odds that should have ended the story very differently than it did. When Sorn reached the part about the recording, about the tired, static-filled voice explaining why every minute mattered, a stillness settled over the whole gathering that felt different from ordinary silence, heavier, more attentive. His name, Sorn said finally, was Daniel Reyes. We have called him only the Warden for longer than most of us have been alive, a title earned honestly, but a title all the same, not a name. Today, we correct that too. His name will be recorded properly in our own histories from this point forward, not just carried quietly in old human records that most of our clan will never read. He will be remembered as himself, not only as what he did for us. A murmur passed through the gathered dragons, not disagreement, but something closer to quiet agreement finally being spoken aloud after being felt for generations without words. Ren stepped forward when Sorn gestured for her. The pendant passed gently into her claws once more. She hadn't expected to be asked to do anything during this, hadn't prepared any words, but standing there in front of the whole clan, holding the small, warm, steady light that had started all of this, she found she didn't need prepared words at all. I found this by accident, she said, her voice smaller than Sorn's, but carrying clearly enough in the quiet. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it made me cry, and I didn't understand why, and that frightened me more than almost anything ever has. She paused, looking down at the pendant, then back up at the crowd. But I'm not frightened anymore. I think I understand now. It wasn't sadness that needed to go away. It was sadness that needed to finally be heard by someone. She walked forward, toward the leaning doorway, toward the exact spot near the old turret controls where Daniel Reyes had once sat, exhausted and bleeding, asking only if the eggs were safe before anything else. She knelt and placed the pendant carefully on the worn stone there, not hidden this time, not buried, but set deliberately in the open where anyone passing through could see it and remember. He didn't leave this behind because he lost it, Ren said, straightening again. I think he left it here on purpose. I think some part of him hoped someone would eventually come looking and understand, even if it took a very long time to happen. Rook stepped up beside her, adding quietly, mostly to her, but loud enough for those nearby to hear as well. It took longer than it should have, but we did come looking eventually. Sorn nodded slowly, satisfied, and turned back to address the full gathering one final time. This will not be the only relic from that time, still waiting somewhere to be found. The outpost held more than one vault, more than one story that ended before it should have. It's likely other pieces of that history are still out there, in other ruins, waiting the same way this one waited, for someone patient enough, or lucky enough, to notice. The gathering slowly began to disperse as the sky darkened fully into evening, small groups breaking off to talk quietly among themselves about what they'd just heard, about a name most of them would carry properly from now on instead of only a title. Ren stayed a while longer near the doorway, watching the faint light still glowing steadily from the pendant resting on the stone, no longer buried, no longer forgotten, no longer carrying its weight alone. Rook stood beside her, uncharacteristically quiet, until he finally spoke again. You know we're going to end up back in these ruins again eventually, don't you? Looking for whatever else is still out there. Ren almost smiled, the first real smile she'd managed since the crying had started the night before. I know. Good, Rook said, because I don't think either of us was ever really going to stay away for long anyway. Above them, the last light of the day faded slowly behind the broken tower, and the pendant kept glowing quietly at the doorway, steady and unhurried, exactly the way it had waited for decades before two curious hatchlings finally found it, and finally understood that some small things, left behind carefully enough, are never really lost at all. They are only waiting.